Yiboneh, Yiboneh HaMikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh HaMikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. Neshama shel shir chadash.
Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome to the Yiboneh Community Center. We are not yet open. Hopefully on Hanukkah we'll have a grand opening. But we welcome everybody. A warm welcome home to Torah. For those who are not familiar with what we do here, we use the Yakar as the basis of our discussion. Of course, we deal with fundamentals, really fundamental concepts in Judaism, in Yahadut. And I encourage you to use the original Hebrew sheets, which you can find down below a link to in the YouTube description box. That's like number one. Number two, we're actually going to talk about tzedakah, charity to a certain extent, how important it is. And I just want people to know that on our website, you can actually make a dedication to this new center. Whether it's buying a bookcase, which every bookcase is full of books, will be full of books, as you see. With your donations, it will go very far, and you'll see the list. I mean, you can put your name on the building, or you can put your name on the Beit Midrash. There's so many things you could do, but supporting Torah, you'll see, giving tzedakah for a worthy cause, because what we do here at Yiboneh is we give out a lot of charity, and we help so many people in so many different ways. So through tonight's learning, which is just, I randomly picked something I haven't seen or done before, in the Yakar, which is always exciting for me. Of course, review. You have to do review. You have to go over the lessons you've already learned and embed them, right? Bring them into your heart, and hopefully that will change your life or make your life more meaningful and better. So what we are discussing here tonight is the children who are born, these twins that are born from that relationship where Yehuda goes out and he is involved with Tamar, not knowing it was Tamar, about to put her to death, where, she puts up the simonim, and he admits that she's more righteous than him. And these are the two children who are born from this union of Yehuda and Tamar, who one of them ends up being in direct lineage for kingship, and one of them does not, and we're about to find out why that is. So we're dealing in Parashat Vayeishev. It's in chapter 38 of Genesis, verse 29. Okay, now we're dealing with the birth of Perez and Zerach. Who comes from who? Right? Yehuda is going to descend from Perez. And Zerach, we'll see who descends from Zerach. But the pasuk we're looking at is in verse 29, where it says in English first, and it came about as he was drawing back his hand, behold, his brother emerged, and she said, the mother, with what strength you have strengthened yourself? And he, Yehuda, named him Perez, right? Peretz. Now, what was actually happening? The first one to reach out his hand from the womb, right, so to speak, from the womb, was the hand of Zerach. And there was a simon placed, a crimson piece of string placed on his hand, and he withdrew his hand. He brought his hand back in. I mean, you have to have a good imagination. I don't know if this ever happened in history, but it happened. And he put his hand back in, and then Peretz came out first. So who really was born first? Let's leave that up for now for your imagination. But the actual baby that came out first was Peretz, even though Zerach put his hand out and then withdrew his hand. And we're going to focus on these words. As he was drawing back his hand. In Hebrew, Vihi ke meshiv yado. Okay, that's going to be the words we're going to be using to explain everything. Now, the first thing the Yakar points out is Arba Yedot ketuvim kan. 4 times the word hand is said. Now, I will read the English just so you should see how, and we'll count them together. So if we go back to verse 27. And it came to pass at the time she gave birth that behold, there were twins in her womb. And it happened, 28, that as she gave birth, one put out a hand. First time hand is used. A midwife took a crimson thread and tied it on his hand, saying, that's the second time hand is used. This one emerged first. Oh, 1 second. And it was, as he drew back his hand, this is our verse, that behold, his brother emerged. And then she said, with what strength you asserted yourself? And he called, that's Yehuda, called his name Peretz. Afterwards, his brother on whose hand, so where are we at? Is this the 3rd time or the 4th time? Was the crimson thread, came out, and he called his name Zerach. I want to go back and read again so we have all 4 times. It happened that as she gave birth, one put out a hand. The midwife took the crimson thread and tied it on his hand. This one emerged first, and it was, he drew back his hand. 3rd time, that behold, his brother emerged, and she said, with what strength you asserted yourself? And he called his name Peretz. Afterwards, his brother on whose hand, 4 times hand is used, was the crimson thread. That one came out, and Yehuda called him Zerach. Okay, so the Yakar points out, in case we didn't realize, that the word hand is used 4 times. Arba yadot ketuvim kan. 4 times the word hand is used here. Now he says, Keneged arba charamot shema'al achan. So Achan in Joshua, he committed a crime of ma'ala. He took things that were sacred, and he took them, actually he stole. And you should be familiar with what happens over there. He's put to death. Who did he come from? He descended from Zerach. Sheyatsa mimenu, as it says in Sanhedrin 43a. I mean, the Gemara is actually bringing down a verse itself. If you read Joshua chapter 7, verses 24 and 25, it says that Yeshua took Achan, the son of Zerach, the silver, the mantle, the wedge of gold, and his sons and his daughters and his oxen and his asses and his sheep and his tent and all that he had, and all of Israel with him. And it continues, and all of Israel stoned him with stones. They burned them with fire and stoned them with stones. We're not going to deal with the crime of Achan tonight, but apparently, according to the Gemara, actually was a little bit confusing to me, because there's one opinion that he violated 3 serious crimes. Another opinion, he violated 5 serious crimes. Where the Yakar got that he violated 4, I don't know. But maybe it's a compromise. I don't know. But we'll go with the flow that the word yadav, his hands are written 4 times. That's clear. That's for sure. We went through it twice. And the Yakar is explaining, based on this Gemara, that he violated, he transgressed using holy items 4 different ways. So the Yakar says, Ramaz davar zekan. The reason there's a hint to this idea of the connection between hands and violations is to teach us, lahoros, sheba'avor sheyetze mimenu Achan, on account of the fact that Achan descended from him, came from him, al ken lo yitzlach lemelucha. Zerach did not merit to succeed, to become a king, nor any of his children. Only through the line of Yehuda. Okay? And why is that? The Yakar brings down a verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs, Kaftet Dalid, 29:4. It's number 3 on the source sheet. It says, Melech b'mishpat ya'amid aretz. That only if a king is stern and establishes justice, then the country will exist. Right? Here he translates, a king establishes the country with justice, or through justice. But what about an ish terumot yeher sena? right? Haras. A haughty man will destroy the country. In the Rashi says, if an honest judge, remember King Solomon, he was a king. King David was a king. They were judges. They sat in judgment. So if he's an honest judge, he establishes a country. Whereas Rashi continues to say, what about a haughty man? He does not care to take time in judgment. Either he's too quick or he's not as diligent. The rabbis in Kesubis mention that if a judge is like a king, who does not have to acquire friends and accept bribes. So now we're talking about a judge himself. If he's acting like a king, a proper king should be very wealthy, and he doesn't have to acquire friends, right? There's a mission in Pirkei Avot to acquire friends. Well, he doesn't have to acquire friends because he has, I don't know, the power of life and death. You're like automatically the king's friend. And he certainly doesn't have to accept any bribes. And through that, he's able to bring, right, true justice to the country. And he establishes the country. But if he's like a priest, so there's a difference between the kingship, which is, let's say, domestic law, as opposed to a priest, which is religious law. And if the priest asks for trumot in the threshing floors, if he's asking, first of all, you, as the one giving, have the right to choose which priest you give it to. So the priest who's trying to get the truma, he's tearing it down. Meaning if the king is acting like a priest, so there's an idea of separation between what we call, and in English, in America, they call it separation between church and state. So in our Judaism, there's no separation. There really is no, on a certain level, there's no separation. However, we have to imagine a separation, right? So the king should not act like a priest and demand things, but rather be quite confident and self-sufficient and whatnot. Okay, so the Yakar continues after this verse. After we got this idea that Zerach was not going to be matzliach with kingship because of his, well, we're going to see and find out. Ki im yita acher habetza. The only, right, if you basically chase after greed. If greed is your motivating factor, that's going to be a problem. And therefore, yavo lidei kabbalat shochat. Then you're going to accept bribes. This is what we see happening in many countries. I don't want to mention any names, but we basically have people who run for office who are poor when they run, and then 30 years later or 40 years later, they're multimillionaires. It's better to have someone who's wealthy to start off, who's not going to accept bribes. You get the hint? Al kain heishiv achor yado. Therefore, he withdrew his hand. He had no place. This person called Zerach had no place as being a king. Kedei shelo yeh lo bechura v'amalucha. So he withdrew his hand because he really wasn't fit, neither to be the firstborn, nor to be in line of kings. It's very strange because we're getting an introduction to this idea that he withdrew his hand. That's literally the words we're dealing with. And the Yakar is giving us some insight into the type of person who you want as a leader. And unfortunately, even Zerach had progeny who was, talking about Achan here, committed a grave crime of thievery. I wouldn't call it extortion, but it was definitely thievery, and he violated the sanctity and the holy things that were captured in war, and that was in Jericho, and was not to be used at all by anybody who collected what we call the shlal, the spoils of war. That was dedicated to Hashem and to be totally destroyed and burnt. And he stole. And you know what happened as a result? 36 soldiers died in the next war of Ai. And I think it's going to be very pertinent to talk about as we go further. Hine makom iti lefaresh arba yadot elu. So the Yakar is now going to try to explain the fact that it had 4 times the word hand in the few sentences that we read. Sheyesh behem remez. There's some kind of a hint Al ish choimed mamon. There's a hint regarding someone who desires, has such a desire for money. Ve'eno niftar min ha'olam v'chatzi ta'avato biyado. That he does not pass from this world with even half of his desires fulfilled. Right? As it says, Yesh biyado maneh. If someone has 100, mitaveh ma'atayim v'chulei. He's going to want 200. You have 100, you want 200, whatever you have. Well, guess what? That doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. It's not a good thing to be in this constant state of desiring more and more and more and more wealth of whatever it is. Hine, kol adam, every human being. Well, again, there's a general rule. David, every human being, yesh lo shtei yadayim, has two hands. Okay, we know exceptions, but asher behem amal v'toreach lahasig malo chafnayim bekocho v'oitzum yado kfi asher tasig yado. And what does he do with those two hands that he has in this lifetime? He's going to make effort and work in order to receive, to reach handfuls with his own power and his own might, according to whatever effort he made. Right? That's what we do. We have two hands, not four. Wait till you see this. V'im kain, if that's true, kol asher b'chocho musag mishtei yadav. Right? Anything that he achieves, obtains, is because of the work of his two hands. V'im eno mistapek b'ma shechanunu elokim malo chafnayim. If for some reason that person is not satisfied in what Hashem granted him by filling his hands, by having a full, a handful, Harehu choymed oid malo chafnayim. So then he desires more. I just want to stop here for a second and mention, Pirkei Avos tells us, who's wealthy? Who is wealthy? Someone who is someach bechelko, someone who is happy with his lot. That's rich. That's wealth, right? That's true happiness. The person who cannot stand the fact that someone else has more than him, I think they call that in America, they call it keeping up with the Joneses. In our circles, we say keeping up with the Schwartzes. But you get the idea that the grass is always greener on the other side, or you're never satisfied, you're not completely satisfied. That I get, but you want more? Harehu choymed od malo chafnayim. As we said, he's desiring more, that his hands should be full. Dahainu, kidei malechet arba yadayim. The word malechet here is outcome. In order that the outcome would be enough for 4 hands. 2 hands are not enough. 4 hands is what he wants. V'be'etzem hashiur shel bal hamana hachoymed masayim. This, in essence, is the measure of someone who owns 1 but wants 2, or has 100 and wants 200, or has 1 million and wants 2 million. You can do the math. Dahainu kefel mikdei hamusaglo kavar mishtei yodav, meaning double of what he's already achieved. He still wants more than just his 2 hands. The kol choymed mamon enu bal tzedakah. This is where we get to the idea that anybody who has this deep desire for money, I'm not going to call greed, although we started with that idea, but he has this desire for money, he's unlikely, okay? David, he's unlikely. Therefore, as we were saying, anybody who is desiring money cannot be a true giver. He's not going to be a real giver because he wants to hold on to his money and hold on to his money in order to just make more money, which I understand, but we'll find out that the one who really wants to make an impression on the world and get, we're going to call a place in Olam Baba, and get true reward, will understand whatever he was given is not even his, right? It's a gift from God. God graced you with this, and you would likely to give tzedakah, as opposed to someone who thinks that they earned it and it belongs to them, and they're going to use that money just to make more money. But the point here, he says, Al ken lo yitzlach b'lemelucha. That's why Zerach, 4 times yad, right? 4 times his hand is used, and we saw that he gave progenies to Achan. He is not likely to be successful, to be in a position of power, kingship, or judgment, as Chazal tell us in Gemara Sanhedrin 49a. Shebeschut she'asa Dovid mishpat lezeh u'tzedakah lezeh. When he did mishpat, you know what he did? He made sure that everybody walked out happy, right? That the guy who was being judged, right, let's say wrong, he did a wrong, and he was giving justice. David was Av Beis Din, right? He was an Av Beis Din, but he was on the Sanhedrin. And he made sure in his court that the person who was guilty, there was mishpat, there was true judgment, and at the same time, tzedakah, true, so even the word tzedek means judgment and righteousness, but it's tzedakah, it's charity. He made sure that everybody walked out feeling that mishpat was done and tzedakah was done. And he says, ready for this? Because he did both, Yoav was his general, was minatseach b'milchama. And we're going to see the Gemara now. Why David was successful in war. And we're going to see that the enemies will fall if you do what? If you give tzedakah. Okay, so for those people, I can't believe, for last year and almost a half, the Jewish people have been doing so much tzedakah, so much for the war effort, so much for the widows, so much for the women whose husbands are miluim, so much for the soldiers. It's like impossible to describe in a short period of time the amount. And we have here people who are making tzitzis. Yiboneh was facilitating 90 pairs of tefillin for soldiers that wanted. We made thousands and thousands. I have no idea how many, just our group alone, made tzitzis for the chayalim underneath the rabbanut of the army. And we had given tens of thousands of shekel in the beginning anyway towards the mufunim. And Baruch Hashem, so many organizations have been there for each other. We're all here for each other, and that's true tzedakah. And this is where we're going to win the war. You understand that? Wait till you hear more. Okay, if you look at source number 4, Sanhedrin 49a, I think it's worth reading to understand David's judgment and the tzedakah part that really brought about Yoav's ability to for the army to be successful. So it says, the Gemara notes, and so the previous part of the Gemara described Yoav in a very negative light. But not everyone agrees with this. So those who view Yoav in a negative light disagree with the previous opinion, right? The previous opinion of Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. As Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana says, if it wasn't for David, who studied the Torah, Yoav would not have been able to wage war successfully. We're going to see 2 things, Torah and tzedakah. And were it not for the military acumen of Yoav, then David would not have been able to study Torah. It's so interesting. You have the army and you have the yeshiva. If it wasn't for one, you wouldn't have had success. You needed the army so that the yeshiva guys can study. You need the yeshiva guys to study so that the army could succeed. Why does everything have to be black and white? What do they call it? Binary? One way or the other. Elu ve'elu, divrei Elokim chayim. Both this and that are the way of the words of God. It says in 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 15, that David exacted judgment and justice. The verse says about mishpat and tzedakah to all his people, and Yoav, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. That is what made success. Both. Like it just said, by David, he did mishpat lezeh, the tzedakah lezeh. And what's the reason that David executed judgment and justice to all his people? How did he do both mishpat and tzedakah? He was able to do so because Yoav was over the army, assisting him and fighting his battles. What is the reason that Yoav, the son who was over the army, he was able to do so because David did originally both tzedek and mishpat, tzedakah and mishpat. And that's the Gemara. Let's go on in the Yakar. Al Keinemar Etzel Yehuda. Regarding Yehuda, in the brachot of Moshe Rabbeinu to the tribe of Yehuda, look in chapter 33, verse 7 of the Deuteronomy. 33:7. We find that in number 5. May this also be for Yehuda. And he, Moses, said, O hearken, O Lord, hearken to Yehuda's voice and bring him to his people. Now hear these words. May his hands do battle for him. The hands that can either give tzedakah or refrain from giving tzedakah. May his hands do battle for him, and may you, Hashem, be a help against who? Against his enemies. Okay, look in the Hebrew, it says, Yodav Rav Lo. Now, the word Rav, it's a very interesting word because it can mean so many different things. It can be a master, a Rav. It could be a lot. It could be many. Here it means enough. It means enough. Well, we'll see. Here it's being translated as battle. Battle? Let's see the Yakar. He says, Al Kenemer Etzel Yehuda in 33 verse 7 of Deuteronomy, Yodav Rav Lo. Again, we are translating it as battle because you're talking about the enemies. The Yakar says, Yarivu Lo. Yarivu Lo means that his hands, what? They should do battle. Mi boile. It should have been plural. The word Rav, if it means battle, since the hands are plural, the word battle should be plural. Ki Yodav shtayim b'mashma. Of course, Yodav implies two hands. It's plural. The word Rav is Lashon Yachid. Something doesn't add up. Something doesn't make sense. Ela Shahura, that what is it trying to teach us? There is a lesson here. Shalo haya choymeid mamon shel shtei yadayim anosafim. The lesson is one should not desire money or physical wealth more than two hands worth. More, right? More than you can handle. Kishtei yodov ravlo dailo. Two hands is enough. The word rav means enough. It's another way to look at it. Ki rav hu mashma lashon dai. It's enough for you. In fact, that's how it's translated. If you, like the verse said, one second. In Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 26. Okay? But the Lord was angry with me, Moses is speaking, because of you. He didn't listen to me. He did not listen to me. The Lord said to me, it is enough for you. Look at the Hebrew. Rav lach. Right? It's enough for you. But it actually says more. Now in English you wouldn't see it. It says, speak to me no more regarding this matter. So in the Hebrew is El al tosef davar elai. Od b'devar hazeh. Don't speak any more about this matter, but if you read it like this, Rav lach al tosef. It's enough for you, don't add. You don't need any more. Just another way of reading those same words. So back in the Yakar, we got the idea that Rav lo means enough for him, and we said it's a language, and that's the verse he just brought down, chapter 3, verse 26. Rav lach al tosef. And what is this hit to? V'ramashayadai lo ba'amal shteyadav. That's enough. God gave you two hands, and what you do with them, that's enough. What do you need four hands for? What do you need? Lo bikesh od al shtayim. Don't request more than what your two hands can do. And what did it say at the end of Deuteronomy 33:7? Wait till you hear this. So you go back to 33:7. This was number 5. right? May his hands do battle for him, and may you help, Hashem, may you help against his enemies. So when will God do that? When you feel you have enough, and then you're a giver. You know that you have enough. Remember, if you feel chaser, you feel like you don't have enough, you're unlikely to give. Okay? But when you feel rich, right, you are sameach b'chalko. You know that you have enough, and you're willing to give more to others. So that's what the Yakar is saying, based on the end of that verse. Lefikach ezer mitzorav tihiyeh, right? May you help him against his enemies. Ki histapkut. Histapkut is a midah of feeling that you have enough, right? You have enough supply, satisfaction with what you have. Ki histapkut zesiba el tzedakah. That's the reason to give, because you really feel you have enough. Asher b'schuta oyavim noiflim lefanav. And because of this, the merit, right? If you feel this histapkut, then in the merit of that, your enemies will fall before you. Uriah mi Yoav, right? We just saw that from Yoav. Just like it says also in Psalms. At 112, chapter 112 of Tehillim, of Psalms, verses 5 through 8. Now, I didn't copy the whole thing here on the sheet, but if you read it on your own, you'll see this is an amazing person. Good is the man who is gracious and lends. Tov ish chaynenu malveh. And what will happen? Yechal kel devara b'mishpat. If you are gracious, right, that's what it means. You're an ish. You're not just an ish tov. You're chonen umalveh. You lend money. You give tzedakah. Then, and you also conduct all your affairs b'mishpat properly. And it's beautiful. You can read all the verses in between. Verse 8 says, his heart is steadfast. He will not fear until he sees in his adversaries. Samuch libo lo yirah ad asher yera b'tzorav. That word, your enemies, your adversaries, they will fall before you. Okay? Now, the Yakar ends after those verses. Meaning he ends his paragraph. So too, it's also quoted in Baba Kama in page 17a. It says over there, someone who's oisek begamilius chasadim, someone who's involved in giving charity, oivav noiflim lefanav chalolim. Basically, your enemies will fall before you as corpses. The Gemara is amazing. I think it's worthwhile looking at, and let's do it now. It's on page 3, number 8. It's like a third of the way down where it becomes bolded large. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. What is exactly the meaning? It says in Isaiah chapter 32:20. Happy are you that sow besides all waters. We're going to focus on the word waters. That send forth the feet of the ox. We're going to focus on the word ox and the donkey. Maybe I'll give you like a little bit of an insight. Waters is referring to Torah. Ox is somehow referring to Joseph. And donkey is referring to Yisachar. Let's see how he goes. It teaches that whoever engages in the study of Torah and in the performance of acts of kindness merits reward equal to the portion of the two tribes, Yosef and Yisachar. The Gemara explains, how is this derived from the verse? Well, it does say, happy you that sow. Sowing what? It's referring to sowing acts of charity. Because we know in Hosea, chapter 10, verse 12, it says, sow for yourselves for charity, reap according to the kindness. So we see a connection right there. And what about the water? Water always refers to the study of Torah. As it says in Isaiah chapter 55, verse 1. Ho, all who are thirsty, go to the water. And we know that's referring to the water of Torah. And the fact that he merits reward equal to the portion of these two tribes is derived as follows. The reference of the ox is an allusion to Yosef, as it says in Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 17. And what about, right? And one's reward is that he merits to receive a canopy of honor, as Yosef did, okay? It says Yosef is a fruitful vine by a fountain, its branches run over the wall. The idea of branches running over a wall is compared to a canopy. What about the reference of the donkey? That is talking about Yisachar, okay, who is described as a donkey, not like an ass in a bad way, but as in a donkey in a certain way. It says in Genesis 49:14, Yisachar is a large-boned donkey. Now we got that straight. Now, are those who can make this comparison in a totally different manner? Remember, the statement was, his enemies will fall before him. Is like in the blessing given by Moses to the tribe of Yosef. And it says over there, Deuteronomy 33:17. By the way, the blessing is bestowed by Moses to the tribe of Yosef. It says, and I want you to remember this quote, when you see what's going on in the world, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in the Gaza, whether it happened, with all the 7 countries that came against us in the past, or today with the Houthis in Yemen, or maybe tomorrow with Iran. Who knows? It says, his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he shall gore the nations, even to the ends of the earth. And what about the merits? Then he merits, and he will merit the understanding of Yisachar. Yisachar was Bina Le'itim. They understood how astronomy works. They understood the time, the time schedules about everything. And they were the ones that learned the Torah, and Zvulun was the one that supported them. It says over in 1 Chronicles, chapter 12, verse 33, and of the children of Yisachar, men that had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. They had clarity about the times and when to act and when not to act. Okay, so the last thing we read in the Yakar was that your enemies will fall before you, and now we know B'schut Shiadav Rav Lo, that his hands were enough for him. We use the word Rav was enough for him. Amal HaMusag Mishtei Yadav Rav Lo. Okay, that means that what the Amal HaMusag, that his efforts would be enough from what he received from his 2 hands worth of work, and he was satisfied. Ve'ena mevukash motarot, and he did not seek extra luxuries, right? He was satisfied. Va'azhu bal tzedakah, then that person will be a true giver of charity. And therefore what Hashem does was, oid mitzarav tihiyah, he will be a help against your adversaries. Now the Yakar ends with the last 5 lines, v'zenamar al Yehuda haba mi peretz. Everything we just said about being a bal tzedakah, giving, and the enemies would fall before you, comes from Yehuda, who descended from Peretz. Aval Zerach, however, when it came to Zerach, what did he do? He retracted his hand. Lo hayu yodov ravlo. For some reason, he didn't feel that what he got from his 2 hands was enough. His hands were not enough. Ela bikesh amal arba yodot. But he didn't seek just 2 hands. He wanted 4 hands. And that's exactly what we've been talking about for the last half hour. And those 4 hands are mentioned in these couple verses. V'chamad min she'eno roilo. He actually desired things that were not fit for him, were not roilo. Like it says by Achan. Achan in chapter 7:21, 7 verse 21 of Joshua. Look at number 9 on the source sheet, where I bolded it. He admitted, this was his confession, I coveted them and I took them. He stole. But listen to the English and then we'll see the Hebrew. And this is what his confession was. When I saw the spoils of a goodly Babylonish garment, and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them and took them. The Hebrew is, ve'echmadem ve'ekachem. I coveted them and I took them, and behold, they're hidden in the earth. He told them exactly where they were, where he hid it. Okay, so the Yakar ends. Remember, this is a descendant of Zerach. Al kain hushav achor yamino kemeshiv yodo. Therefore, what he did was he retracted his hand. He turned his hand back. It says his right hand, like someone who returns their hand, retracted their hand. Kilo lo yemishpat habachora v'malucha. Because it wasn't within his personality, it wasn't that he would have these character traits of proper mishpat, and nor therefore it was withheld from him the firstborn. He was not the firstborn. He stuck his hand out and then he pulled it back, and Peretz was the firstborn. So he didn't get the firstborn, and he didn't merit to be the ruler, the king, through his descendants, but Peretz did. Kikol melech tzarich l'nitzchon ha'oyavim, because it's a necessity that every king, at least our kings, should be victorious over our enemies. He's the one leading, whether it's the decision, what they call in America, the chief of, what is he, president? He's like the commander in chief. What is he called? Commander, so whatever. No, but this is the actual president of the United States has a certain title, commander in chief. That if you're in the Army or Marines or Navy or whatever, Air Force, I think, I could be wrong, you're ultimately under the President of the United States' command. That seems to be what it implies. And he says, this is what the Yakar says, Zerach didn't have it, and therefore he couldn't be it. V'hu lav bar hachi, he didn't have these character traits, ka'amor, as we said. So we said a lot of things tonight, and it's just for those who are unfamiliar, becoming familiar with what we do here. We take one verse, or maybe certain words of a verse, and we go into what we call the Yakar's interpretation. You see, when I say interpretation, we're talking about what he heard and learned from his great Rabbanim, who go all the way back to Har Sinai itself, to Moses. Who was the Yakar's Rav? It was none other than Maharal of Prague, and goes all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. And on the other side, he had another Rav, the Shloach HaKodesh, a very big Kabbalist. And so we do trust that his insights are genuine, and I'll even say life-changing. He's not going to steer you wrong, but we should all learn one thing, that when we read a commentary, it's like this commentary is correct and everyone else is wrong. That's not the case. There are levels of understanding everything, and they go deeper and deeper, and I invite you to come back and escort us on this journey for truth and transformation. And we're doing it using the Chumash, of course, and the oral Torah, which goes hand in hand, as we've been talking about tonight, and hopefully we can all become more with the character trait of histapkut, being satisfied with what we have, and through that we'll be bigger givers, or let's say more often. Doesn't mean we have more money to give, but we can divide it up and give a lot. As the Rambam says, sometimes it's better to give $100 to $1 to 100 different people than $100 to one person, because it creates within you a giving spirit. Of course, if the $100 is going to make a difference in life and death, there's no question. You give the $100 to one person. But a lot of times, it's better for you to give 100 different people $1 just to become a giver more often. I know it sounds strange. Many things in Torah are counterintuitive. You know why? The Torah is our instruction manual for life. And in order to, if everything was intuitive, we wouldn't need instructions. So it usually is counterintuitive. So some of the things we learned tonight, maybe it resonates with you, maybe it doesn't, but the Torah, for the most part, I find counterintuitive, and that's what's so exhilarating, because then you're learning something. And Baruch Hashem, we learned a little bit of Hebrew, we learned a little bit about the backstory, and specifically why 4 times Yodav is used, a little bit about Zerach, and that doesn't mean that everyone today whose name Zerach is like this, just to get that straight, but this is about the historical personality of Zerach, and Achan came from him, whereas from Yehuda came from Peretz, and the kings come from him, and Bezrat Hashem will all merit to give more tzedakah this year. And with that, I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and a great life and a happy life, and we'll see you here next week.
Shir shir chadad